Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you here today. Just going to give a few more seconds to let a few participants come in. I can see the folks are joining us as we begin. Really excited for this conversation, and I'm so glad you're here today. Another welcome as we let folks into the webinar. We're so happy to have you. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds and really excited about today's discussion. Welcome. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Inside the Recruiting Process, Best Practices for Attracting Top Talent. I'm Rachel Harrington, Director of Corporate Partnerships at Forte, and I'm really happy to be convening this conversation today. At Forte, we work side by side with companies and universities towards our mission of more women leading. Through leadership conferences, business education partnerships, and professional development programming, we work directly with women to help them identify rewarding career paths in industries and functions that they may not have otherwise considered, expanding the talent pool with more highly qualified and prepared candidates. And we help companies recruit this exceptional talent, and we provide the insights, resources, and expertise that companies need to build diverse leadership teams and support inclusive workplace cultures where women can advance and thrive. And so today is an opportunity for us to really explore insights from our business school experts on actionable strategies for recruiting and retaining top talent in today's competitive landscape. Our panel today will discuss best practices, emerging trends, and answer your questions throughout this session. So before we begin, just a logistic point, we are very excited for your questions today, and I want to encourage you to ask them. And we have our Q&A function or the chat feature that you can use to facilitate those questions. You can ask them throughout, and we will also have time for questions at the end of the session. To begin this conversation and introduce our panel, I am very pleased to introduce my colleague, Crystal Brooks, Forte's Senior Director of Development. Crystal, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, and hello to everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'll echo Rachel's welcoming statements and that it's just such a fabulous opportunity for us to bring you all together and to talk about talent and all the challenges, opportunities that we have together. As Rachel said, I'm our Senior Director of Development here at Forte, and I have the privilege of working with 200 of the world's best universities and business schools on that topic, on building and recruiting that talent, and hopefully into many of your companies. And I've got two of those amazing schools represented here with us today. And so I'd love to invite Colette and Carol to join me on the screen here. And first, let's start with introductions of the two of you, and then we'll move into some questions. So Colette, could I ask you to get us started?
Yes, of course. So my name is Colette Vogel, and I'm with the MBA Career Management team at the University of Washington Foster School of Business. And I, prior to that time, was a leadership development leader at large Fortune 500 companies. I'm really excited to be here today. It's certainly a passion of mine to work with Forte and to work with increasing the pipeline of women in the organization. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Colette. Carol, over to you.
I am Carol Rosenfeld. I'm an associate director in the Career Management Center at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. And prior to this, I worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And so I'm also excited to be here today.
Amazing. Well, let's dig in. So, given the current economic uncertainty and challenges fast-paced environment that we all find ourselves in. What are you both hearing from students about how they're feeling, about how they're navigating their job market? How is this impacting their confidence, their job search strategies? Colette, can I ask you to start?
Sure. So it's a very uncertain time in the environment, and so that translates to MBAs, and they feel very uncertain in many cases. There's high anxiety, which has always been the case, but particularly higher because it's not clear when businesses in an uncertain environment, they can't plan, and they don't always know how many of MBAs or interns that they might need. So it's an uncertain time, both on the employer side and on the student side. And in addition, when that happens, then we focus a lot on resilience and persistence because the job search can be longer as a result.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Carol, are you seeing the same things, different nuances at Duke?
Yeah, so I'll echo what Colette said. MBAs are anxious at the best of times, and so I'm often telling them it's not the time to panic. And also, I don't think there is ever a time to panic, but they are get to the panicking regardless of what I tell them. So I think in particular, our international students are particularly anxious at the moment. Especially as some of the industries that they have traditionally recruited into that have been welcoming and open to sponsoring them have reduced the amount of sponsorship that they're willing to take on.
Yes. So I can imagine these uncertain times do lead to panic, and these students are really, the job search, of course, is top of their mind. Many times that goal at the end of the degree. So, Colette, I'm wondering if I could come back to you here and dig in a little bit to trends. And so, in addition to the uncertain environment, there's a lot of other things going on. So what are you seeing? What industries, roles are students drawn to right now? How are broader hiring trends, maybe AI or others, really shaping interests and the candidate experience?
Well, thank you. Traditionally, our students were drawn to technology, product management roles, consulting, and some of those roles have been actually. I'm hearing that consulting is starting to perk up a little bit because it's an uncertain time. So companies are turning to consulting firms in the interim, and so we do anticipate a little more hiring on the consulting side this year. On the other hand, when you have an anxious MBA population, in terms of trends, what I can say is that they really appreciate transparency. And one of the trends we're seeing companies employ is use of AI to help manage the application flow, so that, for example, when a student applies to a role, that they receive acknowledgement that, yes, we received your application almost immediately. And then if there's a decision for a phone screen that is scheduled, and then it is scheduled in a way that gives actually Microsoft told me this, they schedule it in a way that gives the student time to prepare a little bit for and research, etc. But then once the phone screen happens, they receive yay or nay, you're moving forward to the next step within 2 days. And then if the next step takes place, interviewing, they receive a yes or no, whether they're going to the next step, maybe second round. So they're using these firms, and I spoke to Amazon, Uber, and Microsoft. They're using AI to help manage the applicant flow and to make sure that students are well aware of what's happening, every step of the way. And that goes a long way, that so reducing the ambiguity around the process. And so that's big. The second thing is to know what is expected in the job interview, or just in the process in general. And to the degree that firms have really made their websites more robust around that has been really helpful and to the students and to us.
Yes, I'd imagine that's amazing. It's AI comes up so often and many times in this challenge. How are we going to navigate all of this? But it's really fun to see the upsides, to be able to see how firms are using AI to help with this transparency, to help with the process, to help the candidates feel more secure, which is fabulous.
Yeah, and it gives the recruitment team more time for human connection, more time to connect and reach out and have a conversation about what to expect or the role and what that's about, etc. So it's super
Amazing. And
positive.
that's of course what it's all about. Yes. You also talked a little bit about expectations and expectation setting. And Carol, I'd love to take this next one to you, because as we think about expectations and differing expectations, generational shifts come into mind. And we've talked a lot about Gen Z folks, Gen Z students that are entering the workforce. They may have fewer traditional work experiences due to the pandemic, or due to remote work. And so, how are you seeing this impact their professional development? What are employers doing and schools doing to support this shift?
Yeah, so it's not going to surprise anybody that the recent MBA grads they're used to living their entire lives online, and in fact, even in their entire professional lives, because these are folks who started their professional careers working from home at the beginning of the pandemic. And so um, I think just recognizing that and trying to work with it instead of against it is really important. A couple of years ago at the Forte Partners meeting, we had the privilege of having Lindsay Pollock as the keynote speaker, and she's written a couple of different books, but one of them is about having multiple generations in the workplace. And she was pointing out that a baby boomer professional might say, "Well, I didn't know anything when I started, and I just got there and I figured it out." But she was pointing out that I think she had a friend who one of her first jobs was in a law office, and in that her friend's role was to fax contracts. And at that time, the fax machine was on this pedestal in the middle of the office, like a little god in the middle of the office. And she just sat there day in and day out, faxing one page at a time. And while she's standing there, she's bored. So she's listening and overhearing all the conversations of the lawyers around her negotiating contracts. She's reading each page that she's faxing because there's nothing else to do. And every time somebody's getting up to go to a meeting or take a bio break, they're passing by. And so she's building a network that way. And none of that is happening in offices today, if people are even in an office. And so kind of thinking about what do we need to make explicit for this generation that we didn't really realize was happening because it just sort of organically happened previously. I think, yeah, that kind of goes back to some of what Colette was saying too about that transparency of just, can we be really transparent about what the expectations are for job seekers, but also when they arrive in the workplace as well.
That's such a really interesting illustration, that standing at the fax machine that we don't have anymore, even if we are in the office. That's just an experience that these younger professionals are not getting. You mentioned transparency and communication. Certainly, we always talk about ghosting, right? And what happens, I think, on both sides in this communication. So ghosting can be a major concern among job seekers. And so what are ways that you've seen organizations use transparency tech? Colette mentioned AI earlier, to set those expectations, to enhance communications. What all are you doing at Duke to advise students in that way? Can you talk a little bit about that, Carol?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, really just finding ways to be as transparent as possible about what is the timeline for this recruiting for this position. What are the markers of success? What does a successful candidate look like? and what is the individual candidate status in the process. And if AI helps to do that on an individualized basis, then wonderful. I do think that our students are starting to see AI as a little bit of an arms race of, well, I'm submitting my application and it's going through this applicant tracking system, and they're gonna weed me out based on I'm missing this one specific magic word. And so I'm gonna use this AI to optimize my resume and maybe write my cover letter, and maybe even help me prepare for my interview by suggesting possible questions or even possible answers. And so I think any way that you can indicate, especially if that's not what's happening on the employer end, any way you can indicate that, I think really helps humanize the process for students, and helps them see that it's not the arms race. It's just not going to help anyone on either side. That if they can get out there and talk to a human and help that human see them as a human, that's really what's going to benefit them the most, and what is going to be, I think, most valuable to an employer too in trying to assess a candidate.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. So we've talked about some of the big trends that you all have been seeing: AI, transparency, expectation setting, generational differences. Another important trend and kind of topic that we've heard a lot about is just DEI. Its role in recruiting, and how it's shifting or not shifting with companies. And in today's climate, inclusive recruiting does remain a priority for students. And so, how, Colette, I'll start with you on this. How are organizations continuing to really build the top of the funnel, that the diverse pipeline into their programs, even when certain language, DEI practices may become more sensitive, politicized? Can you talk a little bit about that? Oh, and Colette, you're on mute.
Great question. Thank you. I had the pleasure of I had the pleasure of hearing some senior human resources officers talk about this recently, and what they are doing is looking at inclusivity as a tenet for their organization. DEI can follow under that umbrella, but really being inclusive provides psychological safety for everyone. And that's where I'm seeing most companies we work with go. It's helpful, to Carol's point, to have a human connection, or to have students see someone who looks like them, who is successful in a role that they're recruiting for. If you can bring alumni in from the school, you can reach out to any career management office and they will help you identify an alumni in your company if you don't know. Obviously, LinkedIn can help a lot too, but that can go a long way. Just having that interaction with an alum who looks like you potentially can help with attracting diverse talent. There are summer identification programs as well, offered by companies like Clorox and P&G and Bain, and those opportunities will also help the recruiting team identify talent that they want to then move on to the on-campus recruiter. And so we encourage all of our incoming students to participate in pre-MBA programs that take place over the summer. And I think just having any events where there are optics where people say, I can identify with this group, or I feel like I could belong here, that goes a long way.
That's great, Colette. I love this idea of the alum, the folks that look like me, that are represented at the company. So hey, that there's a place for me here that I can be really successful. And certainly that's been Forte's work for the last 20 years in building that pipeline so that the the pipeline really is broad, that the top of the funnel really is as broad as can be, and is really inclusive, representative of amazing talent, so that the right person can enter each organization in each role. So that's great. Thanks so much for that, Carol.
One thing you do at Forte with the industry panels, I think it's really powerful because students see, oh, these are what these roles are like in the firm, and then they can hear this from different people who are performing those roles that they can identify with. And I think that goes a long way.
Amazing. Yes, that role modeling piece has been a central part of Forte's work, and just featuring senior women that are doing all kinds of things in business. What are all of these roles? What's available to me? Because of course there's so many infinite paths in business, so many roles, so many companies. So it's great. So thanks so much for that. Carol, I'd love to pose the next question here to you, and I will encourage our audience to add questions now into the chat box or the Q&A for our two great panelists here. But before we get there, Carol, let's talk about long-term pipelines. So we talked a little bit about building the pipeline. We talked about how we can move folks through, but what recommendations do you have for these companies that are wanting to build long-term pipelines with these candidates, especially for career switchers or other special groups? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. I think it's actually really fun to think creatively about how can you increase that pipeline and that kind of relationship with potential candidates over a longer period of time. So one way to think about it is someone from BCG mentioned that they think about every candidate as a potential client. So even if they're not going to hire this person, how can they make sure that they're treating them in this process in a way that encourages them to become a business partner later down the line. I'll say, if a student comes and interviews with you and then asks for feedback afterwards, please consider giving them some feedback. I know it's complicated, but there are ways to give them feedback that is actionable for them and safe for the employer to provide. And that really goes a long way towards building a relationship there longer term. Someone else from Intuit pointed out that their hiring process works where candidates are interviewing with an individual team. So if it turns out that candidate isn't right for that team, they'll make a referral to another team that they think they would be a good fit for, which again just builds trust in the process and builds that relationship. The other piece is our students just grow dramatically in 2 years, right? That's why they're coming to business school. That's why you're recruiting them out of business school, is they're growing and learning quite a bit. And so if there's somebody who applies for an internship and for whatever reason they're not the right candidate for that year, it's worth it to follow up with them in the fall to see where they're at. They were interested previously, and so who knows where they're at and how they've grown. And then somewhat similarly, if you make an offer of an internship to somebody and they turn it down, following up with that person. When a colleague on my team was mentioning that IBM labels those folks in their system as regrettable losses, and they follow up with those regrettable losses because they want to, who knows how it went with their internship and whether that person has discovered something new about what they want out of their path. So in general, all of that kind of goes towards giving students the space to figure out their goals. I think we're seeing recruiting happen earlier and earlier in the cycle, and I understand that push. And I see on the sort of back end that it's not always the best thing for the student and not always the best thing for the employer when the student isn't able to do that self-discovery. So even if you're choosing to recruit a little bit earlier than the structured campus process, then maybe that means giving the candidate a longer timeline to decide so that they can make sure that it's a good fit for them. The last piece I wanted to mention here is, as I said, our international students in particular are having a very anxious time given the current administration, but also just as fewer and fewer employers are choosing to sponsor. the students from Fuqua, as well as students from many, many business schools, have what's called the STEM extension to their OPT time, which gives them 36 months that they can work in the US before requiring sponsorship. And on average, these recent MBA grads are going to stay in their first job for 18 months. So they're probably not going to need that sponsorship in that first role right out of school. And so anytime that you can consider opening things up to those candidates, I think that really widens the pipeline and the talent pool.
I agree with everything Carol said. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both. My goodness. And we do have some questions here in the chat, and I encourage our audience to add more because now is really your time, audience, to ask everything that's on your mind. The first one, let's stick with this theme on international students for a bit. Carol, you talked quite a bit about international students and in more general terms. Do you see this very sector by sector or industry by industry? There's a question here specifically around the tech sector. So Carol, let's start with you. What are you seeing specifically in tech?
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of varied. Tech and consulting and banking have been seen as kind of refuges for international students. I think what's happening is those areas are still very generally welcoming to folks who are going to require sponsorship compared to other traditional MBA industries, but they are perhaps just a little bit less welcoming than they used to be, and that's part of what is causing that sense of anxiety amongst students. I think that at the end of the day, I'd really like our students to choose where they're headed based on their interest, and that is going to get them a lot further than trying to say, well, I'll take anything that sponsors, because they feel like they're opening up their possibilities, but I think in some ways they're actually reducing their options, because no one wants to hear in an interview, why my company? Well, because, you sponsor and I'll take anyone who does. So, but yeah, I do think those are still good places for international students to recruit, just maybe not quite as strong on the sponsorship front as they used to be.
Thanks so much, Carol. Colette, oh yes, do you have
I
something?
was going to add, there are functional areas that cross industries like finance and data analytics, and we have a real focus on those areas right now. It might mean you go into tech, it might mean you go into healthcare, it might mean you go into big pharma, whatever. But that is something that a lot of our students are focusing on, whether they're international or not, because there's a demand for those skill sets along with AI.
Great. That's great. There's another question here, and Colette, I'd like to pose it to you. So as these recruiters are coming on campus, what are some of the general characteristics that they may be looking for? And are you seeing any trends, matches, or perhaps mismatches with what the companies might be looking for, expecting in terms of background? It could be age, years of experience, industry experience, soft skills, etc., and matches or mismatches with what the classes have and what they're bringing. Do you see anything that way that you might be able to share?
No, that's such an interesting question. I mean, it's evolving. The technology is evolving so quickly too. So we are doing, and I'm sure a number of schools are, a number of workshops on AI, summits on AI or conferences, and that's both ways. I think that the firms themselves are looking for people who can learn, and I know we've been saying this for years, but they really are looking for individuals who can learn, who can hear feedback. So it was a great point, Carol, and who can continuously improve and look at processes that can be better and better, and understand the data behind it to make a recommendation. So it's a long way of saying there's I mean, some individuals are saying that AI is the revenge of the liberal arts major, and we certainly have a number of career switchers in our program, and they're looking for creativity. And there's a new job out there, role called prompt engineer or prompt specialist, and so it's the creativity, and it's really able to make abstract connections in a way that can help organizations reach a solution to a problem that they're working on. And that's what MBAs do. They solve problems in many cases.
Amazing. Yes, I love this learner mentality, and certainly that's something that we can really think about in the job search process. It is that learning opportunity for these students too, which can be why the expectation setting, the transparency, the feedback can be so helpful. So I love that. Carol, I'll take the next question here to you. We talked a little bit about that timeline and extending the timeline. That was one of your recommendations. And there's a question here on renegs, which is always a problem here. It's referencing undergrad. We know it can occasionally happen in the MBA space as well. Can you talk a little bit about your recommendation on extending that timeline and why that might be helpful or more challenging with renegs? Why might that be better than shortening it? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, so by definition, if you extend the timeline, you're going to get fewer renegs because you kind of give the candidate a chance to say no the first time around if necessary, rather than giving you a yes and then a no. But I understand that that presents some of the same difficulties that a reneg presents as well. I think at the end of the day, you want a candidate who wants to come work for you. And so if they are saying yes kind of under duress because they feel like, oh, I have this deadline and I don't have anything else because it's August. Of course, they don't have anything else. And so I do really think that giving students more time to consider is going to be helpful on both sides. I think also, this question mentioned that they're seeing an increase in renegs. And I do think there is this sort of dehumanizing idea on both sides where the candidate is feeling, well, they don't really care that much about me as a candidate. Maybe the employer was not particularly responsive, or they gave me this deadline that is so much earlier and probably doesn't meet the guidelines set by my career center if there were some guidelines. And similarly, now maybe the employer is needing to think, well, I'm going to not think so much about my yield in terms of I'm going to make 10 offers and yield 8 of them. I'm going to think, oh, I yielded 8 of them, and of those only 6 are going to come. And so I think just on both sides, there's this loss of trust. And so again, I think you reduce your risk of a reneg by building that trust back up and building a stronger relationship with the candidate. But again, just giving them a chance to make sure they know themselves so that their yes really means yes.
Love that. I love that.
Yeah, also add that the recruitment team should be checking in if they've made an offer with the student periodically throughout the year until the deadline. Ours is or it used to be March, but to say, do you have questions, or do you want to meet some more people? Can we invite you to this gathering if it's local? I think that's really goes a long way. That human connection can help a firm yield the offer, but also for the student to feel really good and confident about joining the firm and seeing that they belong there.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hearing is this use of AI technology in the process and moving things along and ensuring that transparency is there, but then leaning on the human connection for where we have the human ideas and opportunities for that, and to especially in that yield and keeping candidates warm. I love that. Yeah. Let's see. Another question, and let's see, Colette, maybe I'll come to you with this. We talked at the front end about anxiety around the economy and what might be happening. How are you seeing any of this anxiety, or are you seeing anxiety around internship compensation, relocation, housing support, due to increased costs or the economy in general? Are you seeing that show up, and how are you seeing that show up?
Okay, that's a good question. I am seeing potentially firms reducing the numbers that they're bringing into the organization. Like maybe last year they hired 30 interns and this year it's going to be more like 15. But that was last year and it continues to evolve. And the types of roles that they're hiring into continue to evolve as well. So finance continues to be strong, and then anything around data analytics and AI. So in terms of the reducing housing allowance and relocation, we've had students participate in those programs, but I have not seen a change, not yet.
Great. Yeah. You mentioned data analytics, business analytics is this growing field. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about where the type of roles that you're seeing students go into. Are there different trends that the students are indicating in terms of their interest in these fields? What are you seeing,
Yeah.
Colette?
One thing we haven't touched upon are projects and experiential learning projects that will help students get ready for roles of that nature. We offered a number of what we call design sprints for students so that there's a team, so the team is given a problem by the company and then they work it in within 48 hours and then they present back. It's usually done virtually, but those kinds of opportunities give students a chance to sink their teeth into a real world business problem and learn and apply skills that would be relevant and could contribute to a company. So when we do those kinds of design sprints, we generally work with an alum at the company or the recruitment team. It depends. And the outcome has been really positive on both sides. That in addition to taking on projects, it's rather difficult to do in the first year, except through a design sprint. But certainly as they move through the pipeline, they can participate in more projects that will help them skill up. And we've had students, one of our success stories this year is a student, he did not get an internship last year, even an international student. And we have a great mentor and a champion of Foster who fashioned a data analytics project throughout the summer. And he got an offer with McKinsey this year. So, it's how being intentional about the project. It doesn't have to be paid, and that one was not, but being intentional about the project and doing an independent study that you can receive credit for, and then being able to apply those skill sets to where the needs are in an organization.
I love that. Oh, yes, please, Carol.
Just to add on to that, I think for a lot of our business school programs, the opportunity to do that type of experiential learning comes after students have fulfilled a lot of their core course requirements, which often happens in the fall. So they don't necessarily have the opportunity to do that experiential learning until the spring of their first year. And that can be after kind of the structured internship recruiting has happened. And so anything that on the employer side, whether it's returning to candidates in their second year that maybe didn't make it over the goal line and for the internship, or even considering, Colette was mentioning a candidate who didn't have an internship their first year. I see an opportunity to sweep up a lot of talent if you didn't get what you wanted in the first round in the fall, to come back around in the spring and kind of see, okay, what learning has happened and how have these candidates grown, and can I sweep some folks up where maybe the candidate themselves didn't even consider your company the first time around. So
I love that. I love that those creative ways. We all want to get in and get the candidates fast, as fast as we can. But then, how do we creatively maybe think about recruiting outside of that traditional mindset? And there are these amazing programs at different schools, or experiential projects or other things that you're mentioning to get in front of candidates and to really showcase your company, showcase the opportunities, and help these candidates learn so that when they come in, they're hitting the ground running and really making an impact. That's fabulous. I've got two more questions that we're going to try to get through before I turn it over to my colleague, Rachel. So the first is to go back to this idea of keeping warm. So we talked about expanding the pipeline. We talked about experiential projects. But, there's a long pipeline, sometimes very long, if we've got some of these early recruiters. So can you talk a little bit about what these keep warm strategies can be? Carol, I'll pose this one to you. And so what do you find that's resonating for candidates now? Are some of these keep warm strategies, events, activities working better than others?
Yeah, so I think any touch point in that, what can be a long stretch between the offer and acceptance and when the candidate actually shows up, can be helpful, but kind of putting on your hat of, okay, if I'm a recent grad, what's on my mind? Well, okay, maybe I need to move to the city that you're located in. So can you provide some assistance with that, whether it's introducing them to somebody who lives in the neighborhood that they're interested in living in, who works there, or works at your company, or even providing a more structured sort of panel about how do I learn about the different neighborhoods in this area. Um, I think also thinking about, okay, what is going to allow this candidate to have the most success when they arrive? So whether that's just continuing to introduce them to people throughout the organization, the way you might have been doing during the process, can be very helpful. But maybe there's something specific on the part of the hiring manager where it's, okay, well, we are going to want you to have this very specific skill set. So can we send the person for the training early, or can we have them have a sit down with the expert in this area? So any kind of touch point can really go a long way.
I would agree. And also some of those activities that Carol mentioned could be done with a cohort so that the students feel like, oh, these are my people and we're all in this boat together. And that can be really helpful.
Yeah, this idea of my people and finding that culture fit, I think, is an interesting one, especially when connected to a question that came in from one of our attendees that's asking around that they're seeing some candidates that are mid-senior who accept, but ultimately renege when they see higher salaries elsewhere. So what are some recommendations to compete with more money at another place? What can beat dollars? Colette, do you have thoughts?
Yeah. And we so discouraged reneges. We used to send them to the principal, the dean. I really, really discourage that when it happens, but I think it's helpful to, and this is why I mentioned a cohort. Students are attracted, or people are attracted to roles where they feel an affiliation, where there are others that they can feel part of a team. And so that can be really helpful. These are smart, interesting people. We work together and we have a common objective, and they have that sense of purpose within their team when they join. So it's affiliation, and also to understand the growth possibilities in the firm. So you might take a role that has more money, but there's not a potential opportunity to grow in your role. And to the degree you can showcase some of that, it can be really helpful. And sometimes a good manager can help do that too. And so to the degree that you can show this is an opportunity to build skills and what's interesting to you 3 years down the road. Okay, let us sit with you and talk about how you might get there. And this is where growth opportunities are also in other parts of the firm. And that can go a long way.
And I'd just love to add to that too. I read this question and I start telling myself a whole story about what happened in this situation before we got to this scenario. And so I have to imagine that this, a mid-senior candidate, they didn't just accept the job and then keep searching and it was a mystery to everyone. They asked for what they wanted in their negotiation before they accepted. And, maybe it was outside of the range or for whatever reason. And I think then sometimes the recruiting team considers it a win if we got this person to accept a lower salary or just something that is at the bottom of the range or whatever. And it's taking the person seriously when they ask for that's an indication that there's some mismatch here. Of course, everyone would always like to ask for more money, but thinking through, okay, if this is such a mismatch for this person, is this really the right fit for them? And are you aligned with where the market is at too? If they have so many opportunities out there they can keep recruiting for that offer a higher salary, then I think you have to look at the larger market too.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a success story with a company that was kind of an industry that might not be a top industry for women that are looking to move out into the recruiting process. And, it was, they came to us trying to think of how can we really promote our opportunities. And one thing was that there was this, it was a leadership development program that then put them on track to lead their own P&L in, 2 years or something really amazing. And by them showcasing this leadership opportunity, that's available, this track, this opportunity for progress in the future, they were really successful in their recruiting. And so sometimes it is, if it first, finding out that having those salary discussions, making sure there's not a mismatch. But if there's no mismatch, then showcasing what's really possible just for that job, but for that longer term vision with. Good. Well, Colette, Carol, thank you so much. We have had an amazing conversation. I'd love to turn it over to my colleague, Rachel, to wrap us up. But my goodness, I've learned so much.
Wow. I mean, that was great. Thank you so much, Colette and Carol, for sharing those insights. Crystal, great job guiding such a good conversation. I just thought that was really insightful. And, as I heard through this session, the talent recruitment is continuing to evolve, and organizations that are prioritizing authenticity and a candidate-focused approach are the ones that are seeing the real benefits. A couple other highlights that struck me was one, anxiety is high. And what a great reminder that, these students that are going through that process are really feeling the uncertainty of today's climate. I heard AI, in good and new ways to explore. And I really heard transparency in recruiting, transparency with feedback and follow up in the process, and that this can really support a long-term candidate pipeline and reduce renegs and encourage engagement with candidates. And I also heard access to role models can really, really help, promote more opportunities to bring in lots of different candidates into your company. So, I hope these insights and others are helpful to all of you as you're thinking about your recruiting practices and goals in 2025. And I would love to hear more about what you're thinking. So I hope that you will reach out to me to continue this conversation. And we are excited to keep these conversations going. So I hope you will save the date for our next session of the Unlocking Talent webinar series. On May 22nd, we will be joined by Forte experts who work directly with our undergraduate and MBA women, and they have actually surveyed our Forte student ambassadors to understand their career priorities, how companies are capturing their attention. So today, we heard from our professionals who are working with our students. The next session, you will hear directly from the source. We know that recruiting next generation talent is challenging and are excited for this session to share more insights on the most effective way that you can showcase your brand. In addition, we talked today around some keep warm strategies, as you're working through that recruiting timeline. And we're going to dig deeper into that topic at our June session as well. So keep your eye out for that session, and really looking forward to it. Forte, as I hope you see, we not only bring insights to our company partners, we're really here to help you put those ideas into action. So if you need to beef up your talent pipeline or make your workplace more inclusive, we have those resources and networks to help you. So I hope you will reach out if you ever want to chat about talent solutions to fit your specific needs, or hear tips on how our corporate partners have found success with our programs. Crystal just shared a really great one that was really effective. We're really excited to hear from folks who want to participate in our mission, and we hope that our resources can be valuable to you in achieving your goals. So thank you all. Thank you again to our panel, and for all of you for spending time with us today. We're really looking forward to continuing this conversation on May 22nd, and hope you can join us then. And until then, have a wonderful day.